You're about to enter a new dimension where boundaries of life sciences, data, and technology blur, and AI reshapes what's possible. Welcome to the Improzone, powered by Improzo.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Improzone. We're so excited to have you here. And this episode is the third in a three-part series that we've been doing talking about CRM Reimagined. And this episode is possibly the most exciting of the three, but I would encourage you to go back and listen to episode one, which is really about the history of how and why things are the way they are today. And then episode two is the present in terms of what the situation is around making decisions for how to implement CRM given all of the changes that are happening. And then today in episode three, we're going to really think about what comes next in the future. This is about some prediction, some observations, and pattern recognition. So the premise here is that once you've made that CRM decision, and I know a lot of folks are getting close to that decision, how do you take it to the next level? Where do we use AI, for example? Because how could we get through a podcast on anything without talking about AI? And more, maybe most in my passion areas, how do we put the customer back into customer relationship management in a more real way? And I do think of the episodes, I'm excited about this one because I really think we have the context now to talk about where CRM really needs to go. So I'm going to invite back onto the stage Mr. Jason Harlander and have him introduce himself briefly before we get started.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Happy to be back. Yeah, so I'm Jason Harlander. I'm our Executive Director of Technology Management here at Improzo. My whole career in this industry has been CRM, and my claim to fame, as I've mentioned on the other episodes, is I was early Viva employee, like 33. I've been in these systems. I've worked with them with lots of customers, and I'm happy to talk about what comes next.
Yeah. And I think we've been using this terminology of CRM reimagined, right?
Right.
So, what does that actually mean to you from a practical sense?
Yeah, I think the most honest way I can say this is in life sciences, I think that CRM has kind of largely become the system that reps use because they have to, not necessarily because it's something that helps them. It's just it's forced on them. They have to use it. And I think the original idea was relationship management at its core, right? So you need to know who you're talking to, what matters to them, and what is the history of that overall relationship. And I think somewhere along the way it got bigger, right? It became compliance and reporting infrastructure. You added call reports, you added samples, check boxes, CLM content. And I think overall as a tool that brings in like poor data quality, lower adoption, leadership dashboards that, to be honest, are only as good as what the reps reluctantly typed in at the end of the day. And so I think where we've ended up is the data quality problem and the adoption problem are actually a very similar problem, right? Reps don't want to fill in the CRM accurately because it doesn't serve them. And then when they don't fill it in accurately, the data doesn't serve anyone, the rep, the manager, the company. So I think for the next generation of CRM, really breaking that cycle and really changing what the value equation is to make the system useful to the person in the field first, I think the data quality will flow naturally after that. Yeah, I've seen this at countless pharma companies I've worked at with implementations. And when we talk about AI later, Jane, you know this better than anybody, is most AI right now is only good as the data you feed it. So if the data quality is bad, then your output on AI is bad. Yeah, excited about us chatting about this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as you're talking, I realize as we, of course, at a small startup like Improzo do have our own little internal CRM. And I think because it's homegrown and so small scale,
Yeah,
there's an element of obvious value to like me to put something in the CRM because I know I will want to look at it later myself and other people may need to see it.
right.
So there's this like difference when it's small. And obviously, if you get to hundreds, if not thousands of people using the tool, the value proposition starts to diffuse. So it is also it made me think about the idea that there's not a lot of whiffum. What's in it for me in the
Yeah.
CRM today for a lot of reps? And if you can figure out a way to get back to that core concept, if there's a value to my effort in this tool, I get something out of it for me again. And we're getting there a little bit with the next best action space in the sense that if you can, and I've seen this in my past, where if you can get the context and the sort of insight to the field person in a way that is valuable to them. And then they have their sort of task is to give you a little bit of feedback on that. Thanks, that was a great suggestion. Or, oops, this suggestion didn't work because, and give a reason. Those feedback loops can be one of the few sort of conduits for the WIFM for a rep. So if I put this in here, we used to use the analogy of if you're using Google Maps and you're driving and it says, did you see a cop or did you see something on the road or was there construction? And you tap the little, yep, I saw it. Like you're helping somebody behind you, saving
Right.
them time, giving them energy, and there's a feel good component to that and potentially future you, right? Because if you come back around that way, now you remember, oh yeah, that's right, there's construction here. I forgot about that. So like that idea to me was one of the first attempts maybe at this idea of a CRM being useful again to the
Yeah.
people who are typing all this stuff into it. But I do want to get to AI because man, can I not avoid AI? There's so much noise in AI. And I've say I just
Yep.
described non-AI, but AI adjacent idea of next best action, which intends to involve more predictive models and not actual like LLMs. But how do you think about the cutting through all the noise of
Yeah.
AI in CRM? What's the real value proposition for layering AI tools into a CRM?
Yeah. So you kind of have to look at it, what's actually in production, and then what
Yeah.
is like the exciting thing we can put in a PowerPoint presentation or a deck, right? Because they're two
Yeah.
very different things
I
right
call
now.
that
So,
slideware. If it's
right.
slideware, I don't know if I want that. I want actual software, please. Thank you very
Right.
much. Yeah.
What's actually working today? What that is today, right? There's call reporting automation, and there's voice to text capture or voice to CRM capture. That's a big thing. And then you mentioned next best action. That is also grounded in real engagement and prescribing data. But those things I just mentioned, they're not experimental. They're features that are out there that are available from the major platforms. Viva launched its AI in December of last year. They put in a voice agent that enables voice input for field teams to capture information and do follow-up actions. They have a pre-call agent that feeds in insights and suggested actions from like past history, content performance, and even HCP prescribing trends. But then on the Salesforce side, they've released their roadmap for 2026, and they're adding voice based reports, speech to like structured data and stories, which they're calling like bite sized audio recaps of a weekly account activity, right? But then there's things that's hype, right? So anything that requires data you're not really going to have yet, right? AI recommendations are only, as we've mentioned, it's only good as the data that you feed them, right? So if your HCP records are full of duplicates or your call logs are incomplete or maybe your territory structure doesn't reflect how your field is actually operating in the field, AI is going to give you bad suggestions. It can't figure that out for you. And in that case, that's a bad experience for the reps. The reps are going to ignore it and not use the feature because they're not going to trust what the system gives them. So now in that scenario, you've made adoption worse, not better. So I think the key thing we need to look at is AI has to earn trust from not only the reps. Before it gets used, they have to trust it, right? So that means you're going to have to start with small wins, whether that's around call reporting or whether it's around voice to text, and then build from there so they can see what actually works and what saves them time. Because I think AI at the end of the day is still a tool, right?
Yep.
And if you give reps a tool that, or give anybody a tool that's broken or doesn't work, they're not going to use it again. So I think that moving forward as an industry, like not leading with the most ambitious use case, but really leading with what's obviously a useful use case or a useful tool is going to get better adoption by far.
That's a really good way to think about it. And it got me thinking about the work I've done in the past around adoption, right? Adoption is so fragile and it isn't any different in AI.
Right,
If you're able to successfully get people to do a new thing in any context, but especially like with CRM new features, right? If you've added some
right.
additional fields or whatever it is, right? There could be minor changes you're making all the time that whatever that playbook is that works well for you and your organization is probably something that you're going to want to use again. And if you're trying to add an AI feature, is what I'm hearing from you. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't change there's some differences maybe, but for the most part, it's the same concept. One of the
Yeah.
other themes you mentioned that I think is super important is this idea of voice. I know for me
Yeah.
personally, that has been such a game changer. As everyone who
Mhm.
has listened to this podcast knows, I talk at a fairly rapid clip. That helps me. I can probably talk twice as fast as I can type. So there's a promise there, right? There's a lot of value potentially in
Yeah.
voice for folks, especially if they're fast talkers. But what have you actually seen work? Because there's a lot of challenges with voice as well that everyone's also encountered. And I know I
Yeah,
had a false sense of how rough the voice to text format would be going in because it's my experience with, what was it, Dragon dictation or something
yeah,
from years ago. But it is different. It is a lot better. Talk to me a little bit about the voice of it
yeah.
all.
Yeah, voice, right? And I think you hit it on the head, right? Like you're a quick speaker, but voice for everybody is like the most natural and like immediate thing they have. And it can be really impactful in an AI application, right? Especially in like field CRM because it attacks a big like friction point or issue, right? It's the time and effort of all the data entry after a call, right? So if you can talk and have all of that taken care of for you, not only saves you time, but you also can possibly meet with more HCPs or have more interactions during the day. Here's the real, I guess, the way I look at the reality of fieldwork in pharma, right? If you're a rep and you finish, let's say, a 15-minute conversation with a physician, you walk to your car, then you have to open CRM on their phone or tablet, reconstruct what happened. I got to remember which products I discussed, what was the physician's reaction, do I have a follow up? Did I leave samples? You have all these things that happen in that one interaction. And that whole process takes time and requires that context switching out of the conversation they just had. And that can impact the quality of what gets entered into the CRM. And it can vary rep by rep, right? You might get different data depending on which rep is doing it. So by the time it's done, it's a compliance log instead of getting back to the word relationship, like a really
Yeah.
relationship record, right? And that's where voice comes in, right? I think voice changes that workflow on a fundamental level. As a rep, you can dictate a 90-second to 2-minute summary immediately after a meeting while you're still in the parking lot, while the conversation is fresh, and then the AI agent takes over from there, right? And then it structures it into the appropriate CRM fields, the call objectives, the discussion topics, the reactions, if you have next steps or samples. So at the end of it, that interaction, that record is richer, it's more accurate, and it's created at the moment, which gives you the best record rather than hours later. And really, this idea isn't speculative, right? We've got technology coming out that actually does this, or it's on the roadmap. So I think the question of should companies like implement this well, which means offering some training to their reps on how to dictate effectively and then validate that the outputs from the AI agent are accurate, and then starting to measure that adoption and that impact before a broader rollout. And I think that will have some real impact, and I think it's an easier barrier to get AI in the hands of reps in the field and actually have a lasting impact.
Yeah, that's such good context around where the value comes from. And the other thing that's interesting about that is there's actually like a compliance win here that I think
Yeah,
sometimes people get very anxious about adding new modalities or adding
sure.
new risk, if you will, for a rep to start talking about stuff and maybe say something inappropriate. But we have twofold. Obviously, one of them is just filtering and making sure that we're not capturing stuff that shouldn't be in the record. But the
Yeah,
other is that there's this timeliness component that probably increases the likelihood that everything that happened in that call actually gets captured.
yeah,
Because if you do end up kind of doing this later, like that evening, or worst case, a few days later, you know that the detail is lost. And so
for
you're
sure.
missing out on the opportunity to get it right. And so I think if anything, what I've seen, at least in the interactions I've had with compliance folks around this topic, it's an interesting kind of there's like a Uno reverse card gets played or something where they're like, actually, this sounds amazing. It sounds better than what we've been doing. So I think that's also a nice benefit from this is this X-ray.
Yeah,
And maybe moving back toward having a not open field because that freaks everybody out, but like more richness to these calls. So it's
yeah,
not just checking boxes, but actually talking about they were really interested in hearing more about the study that we just completed or
yeah,
whatever, like actually adding some color, especially as we move away from HCP by HCP and instead start
yeah,
thinking about account based engagements where it is going to be a much more complex interaction. And you may need to be making notes about who else needs to be aware of this or who else is involved or if there's a new P&T committee member joining or all these like details that are important that get lost if they're not captured and also go out the door with your expert
yeah.
person if they decide to move somewhere else. I think there's a lot of benefit here that's really exciting. However, what do I do if I'm, say, a commercial operations or IT leader and I'm listening to this podcast and I've got a CRM and maybe I'm even like have done the migration or I'm mid migration, like
Yep.
in my decision point around what I want to do. What do I do now? What's the right thing to be thinking about to get ahead of what's coming when it comes
Yeah.
to these
No,
features?
great question. And I mean, you've heard you and I talk about this already through this podcast, but
Yeah.
I think there's three things, right? And in order of priority. And the first, you're going to hear me say this: get your HCP master data correct. Like, get your data solid, right? That's the foundation for everything else that sits on it. And it's almost always like underinvested, right? I've looked up some studies, and industry data shows that 74% of healthcare staff reported duplicated efforts due to inconsistent or siloed data sources, right? So if your HCP records have duplicates, like wrong addresses, wrong specialties, misaligned affiliations, again, we keep saying this, but your AI outputs are going to be unreliable. Your alignments will be off, and your compliance reporting will have gaps that can start creating a real risk, right? I think the real answer here isn't a one-time cleanup project. It's a continuous like data governance process
Yeah.
with a clear defined ownership and regular validation cycles to make sure that it's where it should be. And then second is making sure that your overall field model is accurately reflected in the system, right? That
Yeah.
sounds super basic, but it's usually wrong. Territory structures sometimes don't match how the field is actually operating, right? Maybe you didn't update your account hierarchies after a reorg. You have alignment data that's 6 or 12 months old. And AI driven next best action and call planning recommendations, they're generated against your field structure. So if that structure is wrong, the recommendations will be wrong. So I think really fixing the foundation before you build on top of it is so important. And then to close it out with the third thing is you need to look at where your highest friction points are and target those first for AI, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's smart to come in and try to automate everything at once. I think you're looking at a disaster there. And so really making sure that the field reps have a voice in this and understanding where are they spending most of their time after their calls? What do they find most tedious about their day? What do they routinely shortcut because the process is broken? That's where you should target AI, right? Call report completion, follow up scheduling, sample logging. Those are high volume but low complexity tasks that voice automation can reduce immediately, right? So I think starting with one that'll have the most visible impact for reps in the first 90 days, win that with your reps and then
Yeah.
expand. And to close it out, I think the most underlying principle, and I keep coming back to this, is AI is only as good as the data underneath it. I can't stress that enough. And the adoption that ultimately feeds it. So sequence matters, right? If you're looking at this from a sequence, it's data quality first, field model accuracy second, and then targeted automation third, right? And I think if you skip those and jump straight to step three without doing the first two, you're going to have a really disappointing experience.
Yeah, that's super fair. And it's interesting. I was thinking about some of the work we've done recently where we were working through where are the most annoying steps in that call logging process. And one of the ones that came up, which I think is probably a universal one, is just the which which document did I talk through, which PDF
Yeah.
did I show, or what did I leave behind, or both, that concept. And it was interesting because we were looking through the list that was given in the CRM, and there were, I don't know, 70, 80 things in that list.
Yeah.
And so to me, that was one of those like maybe we ask a different question, which I think I had to do this actually in my past life when I was in comm ops to say, why do we have 80 things for this one brand? Are we really using all 80 of them? And when you dig in on things like that, you find other friction points that, again, so the quality of the data, it turns out maybe we haven't turned off an older piece of marketing material, or we have two that
Yeah.
are so similar that honestly, why do we have separate ones? Why don't we just consolidate and have one or get rid of one of the two? And so, if anything, you can poke at some of these other friction points and solve them much more simply before you get into the AI. So that was another one that I thought was interesting. Is that maybe we
Yeah.
tackle this? It shouldn't take us too long to run this list and figure out which ones get used a lot. And then the rest just don't even show up anymore. And then it also makes it easier if you want to do a AI tool to say, describe this document. You maybe don't have to be quite as accurate on the name of the file
Right.
because there's maybe 8 now or 10 or something. And that's easier for it to parse which one you were talking about. But that to me, that little vignette of we're trying to make AI automation happen, we're running into this friction point of how annoying this is to do for humans. It's also not feasible for AI
Right.
to do.
Right.
So you sometimes uncover new places to solve a problem. And so now you
Yeah.
have a win on a bunch of fronts, right? The marketing team is
Right.
managing fewer items. The promotional review committee has fewer things to review, and your reps have an easier time getting the right content checked off in terms of what they talked about. So that's like just one
Yeah.
little like encapsulation of what you're talking about that we were living through the other day with a client. And it hit me like that sometimes you have to, instead of saying, okay, what are we going to do with these 80 things and how are we going to map them all and how are we going to make sure the reps say the right phrase to get the right one? It's, is 80 the right number of things? That's a
Yeah.
different question. So those are some of the things I think that to your point, that's in the, as always, it's in the details that things get,
Yeah.
they win or they lose. And you have to get that detailed in some cases for these things to really work. So what do you think are some of the, or maybe there's one theme around what life sciences companies are probably getting wrong about CRM right now, that if they can think about it differently or approach it differently, it can make a really
Yeah.
big difference?
So I think in my mind, it's really treating it as an IT project instead of an overall commercial strategy. I think CRM
Good
decisions
one.
in life sciences are often, they get assigned to the IT team. They're evaluated by IT, it's implemented by IT, and commercial ops is there as a stakeholder when they get consulted, but typically they're not the one driving the initiative, right? So, and the consequence that you end up with, you have a technically sound implementation that then the field never really fully adopts because it was optimized for data architecture and compliance rather than for the person using it, right, on a day-to-day basis. And I think the companies that get this right really treat CRM as an asset on the commercial side, and it really becomes a reflection of how they think about their customer relationships, their execution in the field, and then really data overall is a competitive advantage, right? They bring sales leadership, medical affairs, commercial ops into the decision before a platform is selected and not after. Success gets defined in field adoption metrics and commercial outcomes, not just go live dates and overall like ticket counts, right? And I think then investing in change management with the same seriousness that you put into implementation, because a platform that nobody uses is worth nothing, regardless of how well it's been built or how well it's been configured. If it doesn't get used, it's worthless, right? There's also a related mistake that can really compound this, and that's waiting for perfect data before doing anything, right? We keep talking about data, but data is never going to be 100% perfect. And I think the companies that are ahead right now are the ones who built a program that will continuously improve data quality and not a project that had a start date and an end date. It's just in practice, right? They started imperfect, you got better. I think companies waiting for, let's say, the golden egg before they launch their next best action program are the ones that are still going to be waiting, right? So that's how I see it.
And this is always that tension, right? Between obviously not letting perfect be the enemy of good, but
Right.
also being careful not to, like with adoption, it's fragile. So if you go out with
Yeah.
something that's really not well thought through and people say, this is terrible, I'm never going to use this, digging out of that hole is so hard. You're almost better
Right.
off waiting a little bit longer. So finding that sweet spot between those two extremes, I think is such an important lesson to learn. And I cannot agree more on the idea that it's a multifunctional conversation. So
Yeah.
that's so important to think about is as you're getting started with these processes, the tool actually may be the easier part, or maybe not easy, but like the simpler and less pivotal part actually, right? In the decision.
Yeah.
If you don't think about the people and the process in addition, you'll miss the mark, regardless of which
Right.
tool you
I
choose. It doesn't matter.
100% agree. Yep.
That's yeah. So this has been such a good conversation. I keep thinking about the kind of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and it isn't a technology conversation at all. There's this it's a whole interesting kind of soap opera story of the
Yeah.
people involved, and relationships are so critical to success in a business. So a tool that is managing your relationships is, it's what allows you to be differentiated. It's how you execute more effectively. It helps you become more competitive. Of course, want to leave you, Jason, with the final word on this in terms of what you think from this whole conversation.
Yeah, I think at Improzo, this is exactly where we spend our time, right? We
Yeah.
want to help life sciences companies figure out just not what CRM to use, but how to actually make it work for the people like in the field and the business outcomes that matter to them. So I think the platform decision is the beginning, not the end. And I think if that resonates with anybody, we'd love to have that conversation. But yeah, no, Jane, thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. And like I said, obviously we have lots of exciting things cooking over here at Improzo, and we're happy that you listened and stepped into the Improzone with us. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can find us at improzo.com, or you can reach out directly. You can also look at our website for more podcasts and blog entries and thought leadership. So appreciate to hear more from you on what your challenges are and what you're working on. Until next time, thank you again so much for entering the Improzone.
This has been the Improzone, improving life, empowering customers. Follow us and stay tuned for what's next.